In the serene neighborhood of Maplewood Grove, life had always flowed as smoothly as the gentle ripples in my private pond. This tranquil oasis was not just a water feature, it was a sanctuary for local wildlife and a cherished retreat for me and my family. However, that peace was shattered when Karen, an outspoken member of the Homeowners Association, decided that my pond was the perfect dumping ground for her household trash. Initially, I couldn't believe my eyes. One sunny afternoon, I caught her red-handed, tossing bags filled with garbage directly into the water. Shock and disbelief coursed through me as I watched her casually walk away, leaving behind a trail of debris. Confronting her was my first instinct. I approached Karen, hoping to appeal to her sense of community responsibility, but she simply shrugged off my concerns with an air of entitlement that left me infuriated. "It's just some trash," she scoffed. "You'll be fine." Her dismissive attitude only fueled my anger as I realized this wasn't just a minor nuisance, it was a blatant violation of my property rights. As I stood by my pond, watching the trash float aimlessly in the water, I knew I had to take action. This was no longer just about cleanliness, it was about standing up for what was right in my own backyard. My private pond was more than just an aesthetic feature, it was the heart of my property. Nestled among a backdrop of towering trees and vibrant wildflowers, the pond served as a refuge for countless birds, frogs, and dragonflies, creating a dynamic ecosystem that thrived in harmony with nature. The crystal-clear water shimmered under the sun, reflecting the beauty of the surrounding landscape. In the spring, I would often sit by the water's edge, watching as families of ducks glided gracefully across the surface while vibrant lilies bloomed along the shoreline. This pond was also a sanctuary for my family. Countless weekends were spent fishing with my children, teaching them to appreciate the simple joys of life and instilling in them a sense of responsibility toward our environment. It was a place where laughter echoed and memories were made, each moment steeped in tranquility and connection to nature. But now, that sacred space had been tarnished by Karen's thoughtless actions. The once pristine water was marred by plastic bags and food wrappers, threatening the delicate balance of life that flourished within. I felt a profound sense of loss as I looked at the pollution invading my sanctuary. The pond symbolized not just beauty, but also a commitment to stewardship, one that Karen had recklessly violated. I knew I had to take a stand to protect what was rightfully mine. Fueled by a mix of anger and determination, I decided to confront Karen about her blatant disregard for my property. It was a warm Saturday morning when I spotted her outside, pruning her overgrown hedges. Taking a deep breath, I approached her, my heart pounding with the weight of what had happened. "Karen," I began, trying to keep my tone even, "we need to talk about what you dumped in my pond." She turned to face me, a smirk playing on her lips as if she were expecting this conversation. "Oh, you mean the trash? It's just a little bit of litter. You'll get over it," she retorted dismissively, brushing her hands on her gardening gloves as though my concerns were as insignificant as the leaves clinging to them. I felt my frustration boiling over. "It's not just litter, it's ruining the ecosystem I've worked hard to maintain. You can't just treat my property like a garbage can." My voice rose slightly, but I quickly caught myself, aware that I needed to remain composed in the face of her flippancy. Instead of acknowledging my concerns, Karen shrugged and waved me off. "You should lighten up. It's just a pond." Her nonchalant attitude made it clear that she had no intention of taking responsibility for her actions. At that moment, I realized that direct confrontation might not be enough. I would need to escalate this situation to protect my home and my sanctuary. Despite my initial hopes for a resolution, the situation only escalated after my confrontation with Karen. Over the next few weeks, I noticed not just an increase in trash around my pond, but also a growing sense of tension within the community. Karen seemed to take my concerns as a personal affront and began to rally others in the neighborhood to her side. Murmurs of discontent spread, and soon, I found myself on the receiving end of snide remarks during casual conversations at community events. "Have you heard about that guy who overreacted about some trash?" they would whisper, their laughter ringing in my ears. It felt like I was being painted as the villain in my own story, while Karen continued her careless behavior unchecked. Each time I walked by the pond, I felt a pang of sadness mixed with anger. The sight of more debris accumulating made it clear that Karen had no intention of stopping. She seemed emboldened by her supporters, tossing more trash into my once beautiful sanctuary whenever she thought no one was watching. Frustration turned into resolve as I realized that talking to her wasn't going to solve the problem. I needed to take a stand not only for myself but also for the integrity of our community. It became clear that if I wanted to protect my property and restore my pond, I had to escalate this matter further and involve the HOA directly. Determined to take action, I began researching the homeowners association rules that governed our community. I dug through the HOA's bylaws and regulations, seeking any clauses that could support my case against Karen's behavior. The more I read, the clearer it became that our community had strict guidelines regarding property maintenance and environmental standards. I discovered a specific section that outlined the responsibility of residents to maintain their properties and ensure they did not harm common areas or neighboring properties. This included keeping waste and debris out of shared spaces like my pond, which, despite being private, affected the overall aesthetics and ecology of our neighborhood. Armed with this information, I felt a renewed sense of confidence. I wasn't just fighting for myself, but also for the values we all shared as residents of Maplewood Grove. I meticulously compiled evidence of the damage caused by Karen's actions, including photographs of the trash littering my pond and documentation of its impact on local wildlife. Each piece of evidence added weight to my case, reinforcing my argument that her actions were not just inconsiderate but also in direct violation of HOA regulations. After gathering everything, I prepared a formal letter outlining my findings, detailing the cleanup costs I anticipated and referencing the specific HOA rules she had violated. This was not just a personal grievance, it was about holding her accountable for her actions within our community. With my case ready, I felt a surge of determination to present it to the HOA board. After meticulously gathering evidence and reviewing the HOA regulations, I reached a critical decision. I would send the HOA a $10,000 cleanup bill for the damage caused by Karen's reckless actions. At first, the sheer amount felt daunting, but as I calculated the costs associated with restoring my pond, it became clear that this figure was not just a whim, it was a reflection of reality. I had estimated expenses including professional cleanup services, restoration of the pond's ecosystem, and even potential legal fees if things escalated further. The amount seemed justified when considering the impact on my property and the time it would take to return everything to its former glory. This wasn't merely about monetary compensation. It was about holding Karen accountable for her behavior and ensuring that such disregard for community standards did not go unpunished. With a mix of anxiety and resolve, I drafted a formal letter outlining my case, clearly stating the reasons behind the bill and referencing the specific HOA rules she had violated. It felt like a bold move, one that would set a precedent in our community. I understood that some might view my decision as extreme, but I believed it was necessary to stand up for my rights as a homeowner. As I prepared to submit the bill to the HOA, I felt both nervous and empowered, ready to confront this challenge head-on. With my letter and supporting documents in hand, I made my way to the HOA office, a mix of apprehension and determination coursing through me. As I entered the building, I was greeted by the familiar sight of community bulletin boards filled with notices and updates. However, today, my focus was solely on delivering my cleanup bill. I approached the front desk and handed over my meticulously prepared packet to the HOA manager. "I'd like to submit this formal request regarding the recent damage to my pond," I explained, trying to keep my voice steady. The manager glanced at the documents, her eyebrows raising slightly as she recognized the seriousness of the situation. She assured me that the board would review my bill during their next meeting and that I would receive a response soon. As I left the office, a wave of relief washed over me. I had taken a decisive step toward protecting my property. But as I walked back home, doubts began to creep in. Would the HOA take my concerns seriously? Would they side with Karen? Or would they recognize the validity of my claim? The anticipation was palpable as I returned home, knowing that this submission was more than just paperwork. It was a stand against disrespect and a plea for accountability within our community. I had done everything in my power to address this issue, and now it was in their hands. In the days following my submission of the $10,000 cleanup bill, the atmosphere in Maplewood Grove shifted dramatically. The news of my bold move spread like wildfire, sparking heated discussions among residents. Some neighbors expressed their support, praising me for standing up against Karen's irresponsible behavior. "It's about time someone held her accountable," one neighbor remarked during a casual encounter at the local grocery store. I felt a swell of pride knowing that I wasn't alone in this fight. However, not everyone shared that sentiment. A vocal group rallied around Karen, claiming I was overreacting and that my actions threatened to create division in our community. "It's just a pond," one resident said dismissively at a nearby park gathering. "You're making a big deal out of nothing." Their dismissive comments stung, and I felt increasingly isolated as I navigated these mixed reactions. The tension escalated further when some residents began to take sides openly, creating an unspoken divide within our once close-knit neighborhood. Gossip circulated, with some residents questioning my motives and others defending my right to protect my property. As I walked through the neighborhood, I could feel the weight of their scrutiny, both supportive and critical. This newfound attention transformed everyday interactions into cautious exchanges, underscoring the broader implications of my decision to confront Karen and involve the HOA. It was clear that this conflict had become more than a personal matter. It had ignited a community debate over responsibility and respect for one another's property. After what felt like an eternity of waiting, I finally received a notification from the HOA regarding my cleanup bill. The board had convened and decided to arrange a mediation meeting to address my concerns and Karen's actions. As the date approached, I felt a mix of anxiety and anticipation. This was my chance to present my case directly to the board and hopefully find a resolution that restored the integrity of my pond. On the day of the meeting, I arrived early, clutching my documents tightly. The atmosphere in the room was tense as board members filed in, their expressions serious and focused. Karen was also present, her demeanor a blend of defiance and annoyance. As the meeting began, I presented my evidence, photos of the trash in my pond, details of the ecological impact, and references to the HOA rules she had violated. Karen countered with her own arguments, downplaying the situation and insisting that she had not done anything wrong. The board listened intently but appeared divided on how to proceed. After several rounds of discussion, they proposed a collaborative cleanup effort, suggesting that both Karen and I participate in restoring the pond together. While part of me wanted to reject this notion outright, after all, she had caused the damage, I realized that this could be a way to mend fences within our community. It was a step toward resolution, but as I left the meeting, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. As the mediation meeting concluded, I couldn't ignore the legal implications lurking beneath the surface of this conflict. While the HOA had proposed a collaborative cleanup, I knew that if Karen continued to disregard my property rights, further action might be necessary. I began to consider the option of pursuing legal recourse, something I had hoped to avoid from the start. I spent hours researching local laws regarding property rights and environmental protection. It became clear that I had a strong case. Not only had Karen violated HOA regulations, but her actions also breached state laws concerning littering and pollution. With this newfound knowledge, I weighed my options carefully. Consulting with a local attorney seemed like a prudent step, especially to understand the potential outcomes and consequences of escalating the situation. My attorney advised me about possible legal avenues, including filing a formal complaint against Karen for damages. They explained how documenting everything meticulously, from photographs to communication records, would bolster my case should it go to court. However, pursuing legal action would also mean additional costs and emotional strain, something I wanted to avoid if possible. As I contemplated these legal considerations, I realized that while standing up for my rights was crucial, preserving the community dynamic was equally important. Balancing the two became a delicate dance, and I found myself at a crossroads, unsure of which path to take next. Determined to find a resolution that would restore peace in our community, I decided to propose a series of collaborative cleanup efforts involving both Karen and myself. After all, the HOA had suggested this approach, and perhaps working together could mend fences and demonstrate to our neighbors that we were committed to taking responsibility for our actions. I reached out to Karen with an invitation to discuss a plan for cleaning up the pond. To my surprise, she agreed to meet, albeit with a hint of reluctance. During our conversation, I emphasized the importance of restoring the pond not just for our properties but for the entire neighborhood's environment. We can turn this into a community project, I suggested, hoping to appeal to her sense of belonging. We outlined a tentative schedule for cleanup days and even brainstormed ways to engage other residents. Initially, Karen seemed disinterested, but as we discussed the potential benefits, like improving property values and fostering a sense of community, she began to warm to the idea. To further facilitate this process, I proposed involving the HOA in organizing volunteer days. This way, we could gather support from neighbors and ensure that everyone felt invested in the outcome. As we wrapped up our discussion, I felt a cautious optimism. Perhaps this was the turning point we needed, a way forward that could transform conflict into collaboration and ultimately heal our fractured community. As the days went by, the tension between Karen and me simmered beneath the surface, even as we prepared for our collaborative cleanup. However, during one of our planning meetings, the atmosphere turned electric. We were discussing logistics when a miscommunication sparked a heated argument. Karen misinterpreted my suggestion about the timeline for cleanup days as an attempt to undermine her authority in front of our neighbors. "Why do you always have to take charge?" she snapped, her voice rising with frustration. "You think you're so much better than everyone else because you sent that ridiculous bill to the HOA. I felt my anger bubble up. This isn't about being better. It's about taking responsibility for what's right. My voice echoed in the quiet room, and I could see the surprise on her face as I stood my ground. The confrontation escalated quickly, with both of us exchanging sharp words filled with accusations and hurt feelings. Neighbors who had gathered to discuss the cleanup watched uneasily, unsure of how to intervene. I could feel their eyes on us, sensing the division that had grown between us. In that moment, I realized that this wasn't just an argument, it was a climactic point in our conflict. Would we be able to move past this confrontation and truly work together for the benefit of our community? Or had this clash irreparably damaged any chance of reconciliation? The stakes felt higher than ever as we faced each other, both unwilling to back down. In the aftermath of our climactic confrontation, I took a step back to reassess the situation. It was clear that emotions were running high, and the anger that had flared between us had only deepened the divide in our community. However, as the dust settled, I realized that we both had a shared goal: to restore the pond and heal the rift that had developed. Following a few tense days, Karen reached out to me with an olive branch. She proposed that we put aside our differences for the sake of the cleanup effort. Reluctantly, I agreed, recognizing that this was an opportunity to demonstrate maturity and commitment to our neighborhood. Together, we organized the cleanup days, inviting neighbors to join us in restoring my pond. To my surprise, many residents turned out to help. Working side by side, we cleared debris and planted new vegetation, transforming not just the pond but also our relationships. As laughter replaced tension, I began to see Karen in a different light. We shared stories during breaks, discovering common ground that had previously eluded us. By the end of the cleanup, not only was my pond restored, but so was a sense of community. The HOA ultimately decided to waive any penalties against me for escalating the situation, recognizing my efforts toward reconciliation. In the end, what began as a conflict over trash turned into a powerful lesson about accountability, cooperation, and the importance of community spirit. Reflecting on the tumultuous journey that began with Karen's reckless actions, I realized that the conflict had revealed deeper truths about community and our interconnectedness. At first, I saw the situation through a lens of anger and frustration, viewing Karen solely as an adversary. However, as we worked together to restore the pond, I learned that conflict often stems from misunderstandings and a lack of communication. This experience taught me the importance of confronting issues head-on, but also doing so with empathy and a willingness to listen. The initial anger I felt was valid, but it was the subsequent conversations and shared efforts that ultimately bridged the gap between us. We discovered that we both cared deeply about our community, even if our approaches differed. Moreover, the support from our neighbors during the cleanup highlighted the strength of collective action. It reminded me that when individuals come together for a common purpose, they can create positive change, both in their surroundings and in their relationships with one another. As I look at my restored pond today, it symbolizes more than just a physical space. It represents resilience, understanding, and the power of community. Conflicts may arise, but they can also lead to growth and connection if approached with an open heart. In navigating this journey, I found not only my voice but also a renewed appreciation for the bonds that bind us all together in this vibrant neighborhood.